One of the dangers here is that actually we will continue to try and move the pace of progress at its current rate, while actually leaving people and their desire for progress and their appetite for progress behind. And one of the dangers with engineers is that, first of all, by and large, if you're imbued with huge quantities of human empathy, you don't become an engineer to start with. Secondly, engineers derive their status from their capability as engineers, which means, by and large, developing things of ever-increasing complexity. Now, in many, many ways, that's a fantastically good thing. It's led to most of the real sort of significant leaps forward in human progress. But it also leads to a kind of law of diminishing returns. Now, I'd argue, and this is contentious, that in terms of the really major progress in terms of communication, we've already seen it in the last 20 years. That actually, most of the significant stuff has already been invented. Once you have kind of location-sensitive, instantaneous, addressable communication with pictures, you're pretty much there, to be absolutely honest. Everything else is a very, very interesting enhancement of what you have, but it isn't actually the main story. Similarly, in terms of price, what you see is that the transmission of bandwidth cost has actually fallen faster than any other good in human history. I think at the time of the... people in foreign exchange trading still call it cable, the dollar-pound exchange rate, because you used to, at the end of the day, send through a telegraph wire what the current dollar-sterling exchange rate was across the Atlantic. And the cost of sending about 15 digits of this information was a working man's wage for 1 week. Now, patently, the cost of bandwidth transmission is massively falling. However, there's a difficulty always in getting these things below zero. So that's another reason why actually the pace of change may actually slow down. I'd like it to slow down actually, because I think the fundamental problems of the next 20 years are not actually technological, but they're psychological. And I'd prefer that more mental effort was spent on understanding what people truly want, need, and what makes them happy, than actually finding out the 19th way of watching the same film on a slightly different device. Now, engineers tend to look for engineering solutions beyond the point where actually it brings benefit. Now, I always give the Eurostar as the example of this, where to a bunch of perfectly rational engineers, it's considered absolutely sensible to spend £6 billion making the journey time on a train between London and Paris about 40 minutes less. Okay? Now, I'm happy to accept that argument. Is it worth another £6 billion to knock another 30 minutes off? I'm not sure. At some point, someone's got to say, actually, surely complex engineering and speed are not actually the answer to human happiness. They have ceased to correlate accurately with human happiness. You would be better off putting Wi-Fi on the bastard train, which incidentally still does not exist on the Eurostar. So that bizarrely, it's considered perfectly reasonable to spend £6 billion making the journey shorter, but to spend £40 million making the journey useful is not considered a good idea. My argument might be the next step is to actually spend £50 million making the journey enjoyable instead. So actually, it's going to take you 3 hours. No, unless you're going to invent teleportation, there's no point in spending billions of pounds for incremental and barely appreciable improvement. Actually employ all of the world's top male and female supermodels, get them to wander down the train handing out free Chateau Petrus to all the passengers. You'll still have £5.5 billion left in change, and people will ask for the trains to be slowed down. I actually have, by the way, I have a hedonic solution to Crossrail, which is that we already have a fantastic east-west transport route in London, and it's right out there. It's called the Bastard River. Okay? And people say, yes, but it's very slow. It would take you 4 hours to get to Heathrow if you use the river. I point out that the people of Louisiana actually solved the problem of river travel in the 19th century, which is if you have a large paddle steamer with gambling and nudity on board, no one really cares how long the journey takes. So my own solution to Crossrail is to bank 15 billion, or spend it in something else, and spend £1 billion on a massive fleet of paddle steamers with kind of burlesque entertainment. Now, the point I'm making here is that there is some point at which we have to ask the question, are we actually asking the wrong questions here? Now, mobile, by the way, still has 5 or 6 years of really interesting progress still to go. The widgetization of things is fundamentally interesting. Location-sensitive services are hugely important. Also, I think mobile's vitally important because, regardless of what we're all thinking about here, over in Africa, in terms of the transformative power it has, bear in mind there are probably several billion people in the world who, until recently, used to walk 5 miles every morning only to find out there wasn't any work for them. Now, the abolition of that kind of utterly futile, wasted, economically non-productive effort that mobile makes possible is in truth the most important thing by far, and the development of a 17th app to find lavatories in London is pretty secondary by comparison with that. But mobile still has a place to go. But even in the case of mobile, I asked the question whether we should be spending and actually forcing half of our budgets to be spent on what I call innovation, which is actually a perfectly good philosophical point, which is to try and derive more pleasure and value from what we already have, rather than the endless quest for new things. Now, there's several really, really obvious things I still can't do. Actually, I'm sharing a table with someone from M&S, so I might as well give this idea away. As a bloke, I have no concept of fashion. I have, in fact, no concept of seasonality. I occasionally go into Marks and Spencer's and go, why can't you buy shorts? And my wife says, because it's November. And I go, I don't understand. The concept that actually you tailor your clothes buying to the time of year is completely alien to me. Also, the idea that you might actually change what you wear from one decade to the next. I don't understand why on my M&S trousers, which seem to be fine, there is not either a 2D barcode or a 10-digit code, texting which to M&S would actually just get them to send me a replacement. Every single item we buy in the home should have a code on it which enables you to order more of the same. We talk a huge amount about loyalty in the marketing business, but one simple way to make people loyal is just to make repurchase a lot easier than new purchase. And yet that doesn't exist. There still is no way, for example, in which I can book a taxi by text message. I've been asking for this for ages. Apparently in loads of provincial towns, people keep saying, oh, actually, where I live in Bourton-on-the-Water, we've got such a service. In London, it's still impossible. What I'm saying is there's an awful lot of activity that needs to be done, not in actually sweating away on the bleeding edge of what's technologically possible, although it's a lovely place to be from time to time, but actually just asking really, really intelligent questions about what people want, and then how we can deliver that on that with a technology that everybody likes. And so, a few very brief thoughts on this. One of the most important areas, this is why I want to see more time spent on psychology and less on technology, is that one of the most important insights of the last 15 years is that what people will pay for and what they won't. Basically, people are barking mad. Any attempt at actually deriving a rational economic model of revealed value or revealed preference from people's actual behaviour actually shows that it's impossible. No one has any idea of what actual value is. They simply make completely random decisions based on really weird comparisons. So I'll give you an example. If you have a bit of paper and you call it the Daily Telegraph and you stand around saying, would you pay 90p for this Daily Telegraph? Everybody goes, yes, that's absolutely fine. Here's £1, I'll have my 10p change, please. If you actually say, we've created a website, which means you can read all of today's Telegraph, and indeed it's a searchable database of every word that's appeared in the Telegraph for 150 years, and we don't want 90p a day, all we want is £5 a month. They go, piss off, I'm not paying that. Okay? Now this is important because actually the understanding of what people will pay for and what they won't is the single most important question facing any business in the digital space, where what you're purveying is something which is non-rivalrous and possibly non-exclusionary in economic terms. One of the things you have to learn is you simply have to have about 20 parallel ways of charging for stuff, all operating in parallel. One of the questions is, for example, how do we get people to pay for things? Weirdly, call it a WAP site, no one will pay a penny. Call it an app and give it some impression of ownability, and everybody pays £3 for it. There is genuinely some really, really strange stuff going on here, which needs to be better investigated. Now, the music industry is well known for whinging endlessly about the fact that it faces unfair competition from illegal downloads. And I was at a music industry event, and I said, very interesting you mentioned all this unfair competition. So I said, in the course of working in Ogilvy, I've met the people who are in charge of San Pellegrino, and I've met the people in charge of Evian, and I've met the people in charge of Perrier. And when I meet them, they don't spend the entire time crying on my shoulder about the unfair competition they face from the tap. Okay? What these people have worked out is that there are times when stuff is free. I've also made the point when journalists complain about bloggers that it's a bit like prostitutes complaining about the competition they face from consensual sex. Here we are trying to make a living and those bastards are just giving it away. Anyway, and actually, the understanding of the actual psychology of this seems to be the most important thing. There are moments when it's almost impossible to charge for this stuff, and there are moments when people will pay a fortune for it. and actually isolating and creating the diverse and variegated models which enable you simply to make money where you can and give stuff away when you can't, is the central kind of economic and sort of psychological question that we all face. The final reason I believe in this is that actually there's a huge danger that we pursue an agenda which has no connection with human happiness. We've already done this. If you look at the tech industry, if you work in an ad agency with any tech clients, you already made a few £1 million portraying people sitting with a laptop next to a lake, which is the dream of mobile working. In reality, all this technology has meant to all of us over the last 15 years is we work longer hours for which we don't get paid overtime. It's actually the most spectacular employer scam in the history of the world. And yet, bizarrely, it's masqueraded itself under improvement in the quality of life, of which we've seen very little. The most interesting finding of the last month, and this is why I really asked for us to get psychological, not technological, the most interesting finding of the last month is in the United States, for the first time ever during a recession, the rate of reported human happiness has actually gone up. So bizarrely, the economic crash in the States has actually led to a net improvement in human happiness. And the theory behind this is that there's such a thing called expectations inflation. Now, expectations inflation, the assumption that I need to make next year much better than this year just to stand still, expectations inflation eats away at your happiness just as conventional inflation eats away at your savings. Now, that's a really, really useful concept. I think it's a very, very interesting thing for us to understand. And at some point, we have to realize that there's a danger that this pace of endless and absolutely kind of frenetic change in what's technologically possible might actually be leading to an erosion in human happiness and the other things which are important. So the two possibilities, one of which is, if you like, a continued and exponential increase in the pace of progress, the other one actually being something similar to what we saw in the car industry between the 1950s and today. Bizarrely, and in many ways uncharacteristically for me, I actually favour Plan B. So a period of retrenchment and a little bit of deep thought wouldn't be a bad thing at all. Thank you very much indeed.